What happens when a simple act of kindness transforms not just a day, but an entire community? In a city where every day seems ordinary, Sarah, a compassionate CEO, and Joe, a seasoned bus driver, find their lives intertwined in unexpected ways. A small act, a quick fix, a smile, ignites a chain reaction, challenging assumptions and sparking change. On a gray, overcast morning, the city was enveloped in the steady rhythm of rain. It was one of those days where the world seemed hushed, as if the rain was a soft blanket over the usual hustle and bustle. The streets glistened under the city lights, and the sound of tires splashing through puddles added a soothing background hum. Sarah, a woman in her mid-30s with a warm demeanor and thoughtful eyes, decided to take the bus instead of driving her car. It wasn't her usual choice, but the persistent rain and the prospect of a busy day ahead made public transportation seem like the most convenient option. She pulled her coat tighter around her and made her way to the bus stop, her umbrella shielding her from the rain. As the bus approached, Sarah noticed it slowing down unusually early, stopping short of the designated spot. The door creaked open, and she saw the driver, a man with a rugged face and weary eyes, frowning and muttering under his breath. He seemed to be struggling with something, his frustration evident even from a distance. Sarah boarded the bus, immediately noticing that the front door wasn't closing properly. The driver, whose name tag read Joe, was fiddling with the controls, trying to get the door to respond. He looked up briefly as Sarah entered, his face set in a scowl. "Looks like it's giving you some trouble," Sarah remarked with a friendly smile, stepping closer. Her voice was calm and patient, a soothing contrast to the bus driver's tense energy. Joe glanced at her, clearly annoyed. "Yeah, just my luck," he grumbled. "This door's been acting up all week. The mechanic should have fixed it by now." Sarah nodded, noticing the flicker of frustration in his eyes. She understood machinery well, having spent years in various hands-on roles before moving up in her career. "Mind if I take a look?" she offered, her tone casual but confident. Joe hesitated, sizing her up. He saw a woman in neat, businesslike attire, hardly the type he'd expect to know anything about bus mechanics. His skepticism was palpable, but the situation was annoying enough that he didn't outright refuse. "Be my guest," he said, stepping aside with a slight, begrudging shrug. Sarah knelt down, inspecting the mechanism. Her fingers worked deftly, examining the controls and the door's hinge. She quickly identified the problem, a simple misalignment in the wiring that was causing the malfunction. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small toolkit she always carried. It was a habit from her earlier days, and she found it often came in handy. As she worked, Joe watched her with a mix of curiosity and impatience. He couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed that a passenger, a woman, no less, was doing his job for him. He tried to mask his discomfort with a gruff demeanor. "Shouldn't you be doing something more, I don't know, ladylike," he muttered, half under his breath but loud enough for her to hear. Sarah paused, a flicker of something crossing her face, surprise, perhaps, but she quickly masked it with a calm expression. She continued to work, not rising to the bait. "I think being helpful is pretty ladylike," she responded lightly, not looking up. Her voice was even, but there was a hint of steel in it. Joe's cheeks reddened slightly, a wave of irritation and embarrassment washing over him. He had meant it as a dismissive comment, an attempt to assert his own knowledge over the situation, but her calm and competent response made him feel foolish. He grumbled something unintelligible, looking away as if the rain outside suddenly fascinated him. After a few more moments, Sarah stood up, wiping her hands on a handkerchief she pulled from her bag. "There you go, that should do it. The wiring was loose, just needed a quick fix," she said, giving him a brief, reassuring smile. Joe tested the door, and to his surprise, it closed smoothly. He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "Thanks," he muttered, still processing the interaction. There was a hint of grudging respect in his voice, but it was buried under layers of pride and irritation. Sarah simply nodded, offering a polite smile. "No problem. Have a good day," she said, turning to find a seat. As she walked down the aisle, she felt the eyes of the other passengers on her, some curious, others appreciative of her help. She chose a seat near the back, settling in as the bus lurched back into motion. The rain continued to fall, the city outside moving past in a blur. Sarah stared out the window, her thoughts turning inward. Joe's comment had been a sharp reminder of the biases and assumptions she still faced, despite her accomplishments. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered such attitudes, and she doubted it would be the last. But she had learned long ago to handle these situations with grace and confidence, letting her actions speak louder than words. Meanwhile, Joe couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of Sarah's reflection. He felt a twinge of guilt for his comment, but it was quickly overshadowed by his own bruised ego. He'd been driving buses for years, and it was a point of pride for him to know his vehicle inside and out. The idea that a passenger, a woman, had fixed something he couldn't left him feeling unsettled. As the bus made its way through the city, Joe tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the road ahead. But every time he glanced at the door, smoothly opening and closing now, he couldn't help but be reminded of the morning's events. He told himself it didn't matter, that he wouldn't see her again, and that he just needed to forget about it. Sarah, for her part, remained composed. She had a full day ahead of her, meetings and decisions that required her attention. But as she watched the rain streak down the window, she couldn't help but reflect on the morning's interaction. She thought about the importance of respect and kindness, not just in professional settings but in everyday encounters. It was a lesson she'd learned and relearned over the years, and one she tried to instill in those around her. The bus ride continued, uneventful after the initial incident. As Sarah's stop approached, she gathered her things, preparing to step off. As she passed Joe, she gave him a polite nod. "Take care," she said simply, her tone warm but reserved. Joe managed a tight smile, still feeling awkward. "You too," he replied, his voice gruff. He watched her leave, the doors closing behind her with a smooth, satisfying click. As Sarah walked away, umbrella in hand, she felt a mix of emotions. There was a part of her that was used to such encounters, accustomed to the subtle and not so subtle ways people made assumptions. But there was also a part of her that hoped for change, that believed in the potential for people to grow and learn. Joe, as he drove on, found his thoughts drifting back to Sarah's calm competence, her polite but firm response to his offhand comment. It nagged at him, stirring a sense of unease. He wasn't a bad person, he told himself, just someone who spoke his mind. But today, he wondered if maybe speaking his mind wasn't always the best approach. The rain continued to fall, the city moving in its usual rhythm. For Sarah and Joe, the encounter was just a brief moment in a long day, but it left an imprint, a small, lingering echo that would follow them into the hours and days to come. As Sarah entered her office, greeted by familiar faces and warm smiles, she pushed the morning's events to the back of her mind, ready to tackle the challenges of the day. But deep down, she knew that the encounter had stirred something, a quiet reminder of the work still to be done, both in herself and in the world around her. And Joe, as he navigated the busy streets, couldn't quite shake the feeling that he had missed an opportunity, that he had something to learn from the woman who had so effortlessly helped him. It was a small moment, but perhaps, he thought, it was the kind of moment that could lead to bigger changes. The bus moved on, carrying its passengers through the rain-soaked city, each one with their own stories, their own struggles and triumphs. And in that small, shared space, lives intersected in ways they might never fully understand, each encounter a chance to see the world a little differently. Joe continued his route through the city, the events of the morning still lingering in his mind like a shadow he couldn't quite shake. As the day wore on, the rain tapered off, leaving the streets slick and shiny under a gradually brightening sky. The bus filled and emptied with the usual mix of commuters, students, and everyday travelers, all of them wrapped in their own worlds. For Joe, each stop was a routine, doors open, people shuffle in, doors close. He prided himself on keeping to the schedule, ensuring everyone got to where they needed to go on time. But today, his usual rhythm felt disrupted. He found himself glancing in the rearview mirror more often, his mind drifting back to the woman who had fixed the door. Her calm competence had been a stark contrast to his own irritation and impatience, and the memory of his dismissive comment gnawed at him. The morning rush began to taper off, and with it, Joe's bus became less crowded. He settled into the familiar quiet of mid-morning, a time when the city seemed to take a collective breath before the midday hustle. As the bus trundled through quieter neighborhoods, Joe's thoughts wandered. He tried to focus on the road, on the routine, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of disquiet. At one stop, a young mother boarded with her toddler, struggling with a stroller and a bag of groceries. Joe watched in the mirror as she maneuvered her way down the aisle, looking for a place to sit. The toddler, curious and energetic, squirmed in her grasp, adding to her challenges. Joe felt a pang of empathy, remembering his own kids when they were that age, always full of energy and questions. "Need a hand?" Joe called back, surprising himself with the offer. It wasn't something he usually did, preferring to keep interactions with passengers to a minimum. But something about the morning had left him feeling a bit off-kilter, and he found himself reaching out in a way he hadn't before. The young mother looked up, a bit startled, then smiled gratefully. "That would be great, thanks," she said, her voice tired but warm. Joe quickly unbuckled and stepped down the aisle, helping her with the stroller. He found a spot for it, securing it in place, and offered a friendly smile to the toddler, who was now peering around with wide eyes. "There you go," Joe said, giving the mother a nod as he returned to his seat. The woman thanked him again, settling into her seat with a relieved sigh. As the bus pulled away from the stop, Joe glanced back in the mirror, catching her eye. She smiled, a brief but genuine expression of gratitude that lingered with him. The small act of kindness left Joe feeling oddly unsettled, as if it had opened a door he'd been keeping firmly closed. He thought about Sarah again, her calm, unflappable demeanor, and the way she had responded to his comment without a hint of anger or reproach. It made him uncomfortable to realize how quickly he had judged her, and how she had proved him wrong without saying much at all. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah was settling into her day at the office. The headquarters of the transportation company was a sleek, modern building, designed to reflect the company's forward-thinking values. Sarah, as CEO, had worked hard to foster a culture of respect and innovation, believing that a company was only as good as the people who worked for it. After the morning's unexpected encounter, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The board meeting she was about to attend was a regular quarterly review, but today, Sarah had decided to address an issue that had been on her mind for some time: company culture and employee conduct. As she entered the meeting room, Sarah greeted her colleagues with a warm smile. They were a diverse group, each bringing their own expertise to the table. Sarah valued their input and made it a point to foster open communication within the team. She believed in leading by example, showing the kind of respect and consideration she expected from everyone in the company. The meeting began with the usual agenda: financial updates, project reviews, and upcoming initiatives. But as the discussion turned to company culture, Sarah leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "I want to talk about something important today," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It's about how we interact with our customers and each other." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was quiet, the team listening intently. "This morning, I had an experience that reminded me how crucial it is to foster a culture of respect and kindness. It wasn't a major incident, but it was a small reminder of the assumptions we sometimes make and the impact they can have." Without naming names or specific incidents, Sarah recounted the encounter with Joe, framing it as a broader example of behavior they needed to address. She spoke about the importance of empathy, of treating every customer and colleague with dignity, regardless of their role or appearance. Her words were measured, but they carried a quiet intensity, a reflection of her deep commitment to the values she espoused. The board members nodded in agreement, some exchanging thoughtful glances. They knew Sarah well enough to understand that when she spoke about these issues, she was not just making a point, she was setting a standard. One of the board members, a man named Mark who had been with the company for many years, spoke up. "I think you're absolutely right, Sarah. We need to ensure that every employee understands the importance of these values. Perhaps we could implement a new training program, something that emphasizes customer service and respect." Sarah nodded, appreciating the suggestion. "I agree, Mark. We can also consider a more direct approach, like an anonymous feedback system or regular check-ins with staff to see how they're feeling and what challenges they're facing." The discussion continued, with the team brainstorming various ways to enhance the company's culture. As they spoke, Sarah felt a sense of optimism. The morning's experience, though small, had sparked a meaningful conversation, one that she hoped would lead to positive change. Back on the bus, Joe continued his route, his mind still turning over the events of the day. He thought about Sarah, the quiet way she had handled the situation, and the young mother he had helped. It was strange, he mused, how such small moments could leave such a lasting impression. As the day drew to a close, Joe parked the bus at the depot, feeling a mix of exhaustion and something else, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. He knew he had some thinking to do, some reassessing of his attitudes and behaviors. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. As he walked to his car, Joe found himself reflecting on the kind of person he wanted to be. The encounter with Sarah had been a wake-up call, a reminder that he could do better, be better. And as he drove home, the city lights flickering to life around him, Joe resolved to make a change, to approach his job and his interactions with a new sense of respect and kindness. In her office, Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing the notes from the meeting. She felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that they were taking steps in the right direction. The day had been a reminder of the ongoing work of leadership, of guiding, inspiring, and sometimes challenging others to be their best selves. And as the city settled into the quiet of evening, both Sarah and Joe carried with them the lessons of the day, small but significant, like pebbles dropped into water, creating ripples that would spread outwards, touching more lives than they might ever know. The following day dawned bright and clear, the rain-washed streets gleaming under the morning sun. The city, shaking off the previous day's gloom, buzzed with renewed energy. Sarah, already at her desk, sipped her coffee and reviewed the morning's agenda. The previous day's discussions about company culture and respect had left her with a sense of determination. Today, she would begin laying the groundwork for the changes they had discussed. Sarah's office was a reflection of her personality, sleek, organized, yet warm. Photos of family and friends, along with a few carefully chosen pieces of artwork, adorned the walls. It was a space that felt both professional and welcoming. As she went over her notes, her assistant, Claire, knocked and entered, carrying a stack of files. "Good morning, Sarah," Claire greeted with a smile, setting the files on the desk. "Here are the reports you requested, along with some feedback from the last employee survey." "Thank you, Claire," Sarah replied, returning the smile. She appreciated Claire's efficiency and attention to detail, qualities that made her an invaluable part of the team. Sarah glanced at the top file, the survey feedback catching her eye. "Let's start with the feedback," she said, gesturing for Claire to sit. Claire took a seat, her expression attentive. "Overall, the feedback is positive," she began. "But there are some concerns about communication and the need for more training on customer service, especially in handling difficult situations." Sarah nodded, her thoughts aligning with what she had observed. "It's crucial that we address these concerns," she said, her voice thoughtful. "We need to ensure that everyone, from the drivers to the office staff, understands the importance of respect and empathy in all interactions." Claire agreed, her eyes reflecting Sarah's determination. "I think we can develop a training program that focuses not just on customer service, but also on workplace culture. It could include workshops, role-playing scenarios, and perhaps even some team-building activities." Sarah smiled, pleased with the suggestion. "That sounds perfect. Let's put together a proposal and present it at the next board meeting." She paused, thinking of Joe and their encounter. "And I'd like to start by having some of our staff go undercover to observe interactions on the ground." It could give us a better understanding of the challenges our employees face and where we can improve. Claire raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Undercover? Like mystery shoppers? Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with the idea. Exactly. But instead of shopping, they'll be observing. It's a way to see things from the customer's perspective, to understand the real day-to-day experiences of our staff and passengers. Claire made a note, her expression thoughtful. It's a good plan. It will also show our employees that we're serious about making improvements and supporting them. Sarah agreed, feeling a sense of purpose. They discussed the logistics for a few more minutes, outlining the key areas they wanted to focus on. As Claire left to start on the proposal, Sarah turned her attention to the rest of her day's tasks, her mind buzzing with ideas. Meanwhile, Joe was back on his usual route, the events of the previous day still lingering in his thoughts. He felt a little more self-conscious than usual, aware of how his words and actions might be perceived. As he drove through the familiar streets, he made a conscious effort to greet each passenger with a nod and a smile, even if it felt awkward at first. The morning rush was busier than the day before, with people bustling on and off the bus, each one wrapped in their own concerns. Joe noticed a few familiar faces, regulars on his route who he recognized but didn't really know. There was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who always boarded with a cheerful greeting and a chat about the weather. Today, she was particularly pleased with the sunshine after the rain. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Joe greeted as she boarded, helping her steady herself as the bus started to move. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She smiled up at him, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "It sure is, Joe. A nice change after all that rain." She patted his arm affectionately before making her way to her usual seat. As the bus moved along, Joe found himself paying more attention to the small interactions around him. There was a group of teenagers, laughing and chatting, their energy filling the bus. A young man with a guitar slung over his shoulder hummed softly to himself, seemingly lost in his own world. A middle-aged woman, engrossed in a book, occasionally looked up, her expression serene. At one stop, a man in a business suit hurried on, glancing at his watch and muttering under his breath about being late. Joe felt a pang of sympathy, remembering the stress of rushing to work. "Running late?" Joe asked, giving the man a sympathetic smile. The man looked up, surprised but grateful for the acknowledgement. "Yeah, just one of those mornings," he replied, managing a wry smile. "Thanks for getting us there on time." Joe nodded, feeling a small swell of pride. It was a routine day, but the small interactions made it feel different, more connected. He couldn't help but think back to the woman from the day before, the way she had stepped in to help without hesitation, her calm confidence. It had been a humbling experience, and Joe was determined to learn from it. As the bus made its way through the city, Joe's thoughts wandered to the company he worked for. He had been with them for years, and while he was proud of his work, he had never really thought about the bigger picture, about how his actions and attitudes could affect the company's reputation and the experiences of the passengers. He knew there were training programs and meetings about customer service, but he had always treated them as routine, something to get through. Now, he realized, there was more to it than just going through the motions. In the days that followed, the undercover observations that Sarah had initiated began. Staff members, posing as regular passengers, rode the buses, noting interactions and situations that arose. They paid attention to everything, from how drivers greeted passengers to how they handled difficult situations. The goal was to gather real, unfiltered data about the daily operations and customer experiences. Back in the office, Sarah and her team reviewed the initial findings. There were positive notes. Many drivers, like Joe, were consistently polite and professional. But there were also areas for improvement, especially in how some staff handled stressful or challenging interactions. The feedback was invaluable, providing a clear picture of where additional training and support were needed. Sarah felt a mix of satisfaction and concern as she read through the reports. It was clear that while the company was doing well in many areas, there was still work to be done. She felt a renewed sense of commitment to fostering a positive culture, one where every employee felt valued and empowered to do their best work. For Joe, the undercover observations were a wake-up call. When the feedback was shared with the drivers, it was done constructively, with a focus on learning and growth rather than criticism. Joe listened carefully, recognizing some of the scenarios that had been noted. It was humbling, but also motivating. He realized that being a good driver wasn't just about keeping to the schedule, it was about being a part of a larger community, about making a difference in small but meaningful ways. As the company began to roll out the new training programs and initiatives, there was a palpable sense of change in the air. Sarah, committed to leading by example, made a point of engaging with employees at all levels, listening to their concerns and ideas. The atmosphere was one of collaboration and mutual respect, a testament to the culture she had worked so hard to cultivate. And so, as the days turned into weeks, both Sarah and Joe continued on their respective journeys, Sarah as a leader striving to make her company a better place, and Joe as a driver learning to see his role in a new light. The encounter that had brought them together, though brief, had sparked a series of changes that would ripple outward, affecting not just their own lives, but the lives of many others as well. As the weeks progressed, the atmosphere at the transportation company began to shift. The new training initiatives, designed to foster empathy and respect, were rolling out, and the staff were responding well. Sarah kept a close eye on the progress, frequently meeting with the training team and the HR department to assess the impact of their efforts. She was determined to see this change through, not just as a corporate mandate but as a genuine cultural transformation. One afternoon, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey so far. She stood by her office window, gazing out at the bustling city below. The skyline was a mix of old and new, a testament to the city's growth and resilience. It reminded her of the company, which had grown from a small, family-owned business into a major player in the local transportation industry. Sarah felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just to the company's shareholders, but to every employee and customer who relied on their services. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Claire stepped in, holding a file. "Sarah, I have the latest reports from the undercover observations," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of anticipation and concern. Sarah turned from the window, her attention fully on Claire. "Let's take a look," she said, gesturing for Claire to join her at the table. They opened the file together, reviewing the feedback carefully. The reports were a blend of encouraging and constructive observations. Many employees had shown improvement, embracing the new training with enthusiasm. There were stories of drivers going out of their way to help passengers, small acts of kindness that made a big difference. However, there were still areas where the feedback indicated a need for further improvement, particularly in handling difficult situations and communicating effectively under stress. As Sarah read through the reports, one particular incident caught her eye. It was about Joe. The observer noted a significant change in his demeanor. He was more engaged, more polite, and seemed genuinely interested in ensuring a positive experience for his passengers. The transformation was noted not just in his interactions with customers but also in his relationships with colleagues. "Joe's come a long way," Claire remarked, noticing Sarah's focus on the report. "It's really encouraging to see such a positive change." Sarah nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "It is. I think it's time to acknowledge that progress." She paused, considering her next steps. "I'd like to have a meeting with Joe, to talk about his experience and get his perspective on the changes we've implemented. It might give us valuable insights into how we can continue to improve." Claire agreed, noting the idea down. "I'll schedule something for later this week." Meanwhile, Joe was indeed experiencing a period of self-reflection and growth. The training sessions had opened his eyes to the impact of his actions and words. He found himself more mindful of how he interacted with passengers, making a conscious effort to be patient and understanding. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of frustration, particularly during the rush hour crush or when dealing with particularly difficult passengers, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as Joe finished his shift and prepared to head home, he ran into Tim, one of the senior drivers who had been with the company even longer than Joe. Tim was known for his steady, calm demeanor and his ability to handle even the toughest situations with grace. "Hey, Joe," Tim greeted, giving him a nod as they both signed out for the day. "How's it going?" Joe shrugged, smiling a little. "Not bad. Just trying to keep up with all these changes." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, it's been good. The new training, it's made me think about things differently." Tim chuckled, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, I've noticed. You seem more, I don't know, relaxed. Less on edge." Joe nodded, feeling a bit sheepish. "I guess I realized I was taking things too personally, letting little stuff get to me. The training helped, but it was also that encounter I had a while back. This woman, she kind of called me out without really saying much. Just by being there and helping out." Tim raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Sounds like it left quite an impression." "It did," Joe admitted. "Made me think about how I was treating people, not just on the job but in general. It's been a wake-up call, I guess." Tim nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's good to have those moments, though. Keeps us grounded. I've always believed that how we treat people, especially in tough situations, says a lot about who we are." Joe agreed, feeling a sense of camaraderie with Tim. They chatted for a few more minutes, sharing stories and insights from their years on the job. It felt good to connect, to share the challenges and the small victories that came with the territory. The next day, Joe received an unexpected call from the office. It was Claire, asking if he could come in for a meeting with Sarah. Joe felt a flicker of apprehension, wondering what it could be about. He hadn't been called in for a one-on-one meeting with the CEO before, and the prospect made him a bit nervous. When he arrived at the office, he was greeted warmly by Claire, who escorted him to Sarah's office. As he entered, Sarah stood and extended her hand with a smile. "Joe, thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat." Joe shook her hand, feeling a little out of place in the sleek, modern office. He sat down, trying to hide his nervousness. Sarah settled into her chair, her expression friendly and open. "Joe, I wanted to have this meeting to discuss the recent changes and get your feedback. I've heard from several sources that you've been doing exceptionally well, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on how the new training and initiatives have impacted your work." Joe was taken aback, both by the compliment and the genuine interest Sarah showed in his perspective. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. "Honestly, it's been a big change. At first, I wasn't sure about all the new training. I thought, I've been doing this job for years, what's there to learn? But it really opened my eyes." Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. Joe took a deep breath, finding his footing. "The thing that struck me the most was how much our attitudes can affect the passengers. I used to just focus on getting people from point A to point B, but now I see that how I do that makes a big difference. It's not just about being on time, it's about making people feel respected and valued. I've been trying to be more patient, more understanding." Sarah listened intently, nodding in agreement. "That's exactly what we hope to achieve with these changes. It's about creating a positive environment, not just for our customers but for our employees as well. It's encouraging to hear that you're finding value in the training." Joe smiled, feeling a bit more at ease. "Yeah, and I think it's helping everyone. The passengers seem to notice, too. I've had a few people comment on how friendly the drivers are, and that feels good." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "That's wonderful to hear, Joe. Your experience is exactly what we were aiming for. I appreciate you sharing your insights. It's important for us to understand the impact of these initiatives from every level of the company." As the meeting wrapped up, Joe felt a sense of accomplishment and renewed commitment. Sarah thanked him for his hard work and dedication, and Joe left the office with a lighter step. He realized that the changes weren't just about policies or training, they were about creating a community where everyone felt valued and respected. For Sarah, the meeting with Joe was a reaffirmation of the importance of her work. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the efforts to foster a positive culture were bearing fruit. The encounter had been a reminder of why she loved her job, because it was about more than just running a company. It was about making a difference in people's lives, one small interaction at a time. As the sun set on another day, Sarah and Joe went their separate ways, each carrying with them the lessons and experiences of their journey. For Sarah, it was a day of validation and hope; for Joe, a day of reflection and growth. And as they both looked forward to the future, they knew that their paths, however different, were united by a shared commitment to kindness, respect, and the simple but profound power of a positive attitude. As summer deepened, the city buzzed with a vibrant energy. The days were long and warm, the streets filled with people enjoying the sunshine. The transportation company, buoyed by the positive changes, continued to thrive. Sarah, ever attentive to the company's progress, felt a sense of satisfaction. The new training programs were well underway, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere, employees were more engaged, passengers were happier, and the overall mood was brighter. One afternoon, Sarah decided to take a ride on one of the buses herself. She often did this to get a first-hand experience of the service and to stay connected with the daily operations. It was also a way for her to observe the effects of the new training in action. She chose a route at random and boarded, taking a seat near the back where she could quietly watch and listen. As the bus filled up, Sarah noticed the small interactions that made up the daily rhythm of the route. The driver greeted each passenger with a warm smile, answering questions and helping with luggage or strollers as needed. There was a palpable sense of respect and professionalism that resonated throughout the bus. Among the passengers, Sarah spotted familiar faces, regular commuters who had come to rely on the bus service as part of their daily routines. There was an elderly couple, holding hands and chatting softly, a young woman with a baby who smiled gratefully as the driver helped her secure the stroller, and a group of schoolchildren, laughing and joking as they found their seats. As the bus rolled through the city, Sarah found herself reflecting on how far they had come. The encounter with Joe had been a catalyst, a small spark that had ignited a much larger change. It was a reminder of the power of a single moment, a single decision, to alter the course of events. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for her team, for the drivers, and for everyone who had embraced the changes with such enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Joe was wrapping up his own day. He had completed his shifts without any major incidents and was feeling good about the positive feedback he had received recently. The changes in his own attitude had not gone unnoticed, and he had even received a commendation from his supervisor for his improved customer service. As he parked the bus at the depot, Joe felt a sense of accomplishment. It had been a long journey, both personally and professionally, and he was proud of the progress he had made. He was about to head home when he received a call from Claire, Sarah's assistant. "Joe, Sarah would like to see you in her office if you have a moment," Claire said, her tone warm and inviting. Joe felt a flutter of nerves but also a sense of anticipation. "Sure, I'll be right there," he replied, quickly making his way to the main office. When he arrived, Claire greeted him with a smile and led him to Sarah's office. Sarah stood as he entered, extending her hand. "Joe, good to see you again," she said warmly. "Please, have a seat." Joe sat down, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Sarah looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Joe, I've been following your progress closely, and I have to say, I'm incredibly impressed with the changes I've seen. Not just in your work, but in your whole approach." Joe felt a flush of pride but also humility. "Thank you, Sarah. The training and the focus on empathy have really made a difference for me. I never realized how much my attitude could impact others." Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting a deep sincerity. "That's exactly what we hope to achieve. It's not just about policies or procedures, it's about creating a culture where everyone feels valued and respected." She paused, then continued with a smile. "Actually, Joe, there's something I'd like to discuss with you." We've been considering starting a new initiative, a mentorship program where experienced drivers can help new hires adjust to our company's values and culture. I think you'd be an excellent mentor. Your journey and the changes you've made are exactly the kind of example we want to set." Joe was taken aback, both honored and surprised. "Me? A mentor? I never thought of myself in that role." Sarah smiled encouragingly. "You've demonstrated a remarkable capacity for growth and empathy. That's exactly what new hires need to see. It would be a chance for you to share your experiences and help shape the future of our company." Joe felt a swell of emotions, gratitude, pride, and a deep sense of responsibility. "I'd be honored, Sarah. If my experience can help others, I'd love to be part of that." Sarah beamed, clearly pleased. "Wonderful. We'll set up a meeting with HR to discuss the details. I'm really excited about this, Joe. It's people like you who make a difference, who help build a better company and community." As Joe left Sarah's office, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The idea of becoming a mentor was both exciting and humbling. He knew that his journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught him invaluable lessons about empathy, respect, and the power of change. Later that evening, Joe reflected on how far he had come. He thought about the woman who had helped him fix the bus door, Sarah, and how that simple act of kindness had been a turning point. He realized that small actions, like pebbles in a pond, could create ripples that spread far beyond their initial impact. Sarah, too, reflected on the day's events. As she prepared to leave the office, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The changes they had implemented were making a real difference, not just in the company but in the lives of their employees and customers. It was a reminder of why she loved her job and why she was committed to fostering a positive, inclusive culture. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the city, both Sarah and Joe felt a shared sense of purpose and hope. They knew that their work was far from over, but they were on the right path. They were building something meaningful, a community where kindness and respect were not just ideals, but lived experiences. And so, the day ended, not with a grand gesture, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they were making a difference, one small step at a time. It was a reminder that true change often starts with a single act of kindness, a moment of understanding, and the courage to look beyond oneself. For Sarah and Joe, this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with promise and potential. They were part of something bigger, something that transcended the daily grind and touched the lives of everyone they encountered. And in that, they found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that would carry them forward, inspiring others along the way. As the city lights twinkled in the distance, both Sarah and Joe knew that they were not just part of a company, but part of a larger story, one of growth, empathy, and the power of human connection. And in that story, they had found their place, not as mere participants, but as catalysts for change, each in their own unique way.